Record.
So good morning and welcome to the Love Rising podcast. Today, Claire and I are, well, I for sure am super excited about this topic because I find myself, Claire, you look like you have something to say.
I'm excited too.
Yeah. I feel like I ebb and flow with this, what we're going to talk about so much. And I'm pretty sure most women do. So we have the lovely Allie Rose on our podcast today. And she is all about really helping her clients and those who follow her on social media find a way out of being stuck. And so when I stumbled upon her, and I think it's just because we're both ITN grads, and that's probably how we found one another, or I don't know, but she just has just a beautiful energy about her, and it's very attractive and light. And so she always has affirmations up. And so she just seemed to really vibe with what we're all about. And so I was so grateful that she is on our show today. And so she's all about this kind of going from stuck to unstoppable. And one of the ways that she does that is really teaching and helping others to understand what self-love is all about and how to work it into their lives. So we want to welcome the lovely lady Allie today. And I wanted to give you guys a little bit of information on her, a little quick bio before we hear from her. So Allie is a mental health therapist who sees clients in her private practice in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. And she is the founder of YourStoryMatters.love, where she coaches women through unlocking and rewriting their stories through self-love so that they can go from stuck to unstoppable and create lives that they love from the inside out. When she's not working, she loves running, reading, writing, traveling, playing with her pit bull pup, and Claire and I are dog lovers, hanging with and sharing meals with friends, and all things coffee and wine. So it sounds like my kind of gal. So we are so excited to have her, and I just love all that she stands for: self-love, rewriting the stories, and just creating this life from the inside out, because that's really how it does come. So Allie, welcome to the Love Rising. We're so excited to have you. We would love for you to kind of share your story and your journey with us and our listeners.
Sure. First, I just want to say thank you guys so much for having me. I absolutely love the work that I do, and I love what you're all about here on the show. And so I'm just really excited to get to talk to you today about some of my favorite things. So I just want to highlight a couple of pieces of how I got to where I am now, and then I'll highlight a couple of things about being stuck, like what that actually means and what that feels like, and how I help people move from being stuck to unstuck through looking at their story and through self-love. And I'll kind of just weave pieces of my story in along the way, if that's okay with you guys. So I officially started my journey as a therapist in 2013. But I often joke that I came out of the womb as a therapist. I've just always been able to kind of connect in deeply with people and just hold safe space for them and read people's emotions really well. I've had so many people, clients, friends, strangers tell me that they have shared things with me that they've never shared with anyone else before. And I really just consider it an honor to get to do what I do. So I started coaching about probably in 2014 after I got my health coaching certification through ITN. I know, Kylee, that's where you got your certification as well. And I was actually living in Nicaragua with my husband at the time, and I couldn't officially get a job. So I was like, okay, I just got my degree. So I just graduated with my master's in social work. But I was like, I can't get a job in this country, so why don't I coach people online? And so I've always looked at humans as this kind of being holistic. And so I think it's all connected, body, mind, and spirit. And so whenever I heard about ITN, I decided to enroll. And I'm pretty much the type of person who I often will leap before I look. And I was just like, all right, I'm not going to wait to finish the certification up. I'm going to just start coaching people right now. So I started doing group health coaching, and it was fine and it was fun, but I always wanted to dig deeper with people because I felt like what was manifesting physically for people and what was keeping them stuck at whatever weight or whatever caused them to go in like the cycles of yo-yo dieting was a reflection of what was going on at like a deeper emotional level. So I'm going to just kind of transition a little bit into, because I talked about being stuck, and I feel like so many people, it looks different. You can be stuck at a certain weight, or you could be stuck in a relationship. So I want to highlight what I mean when I talk about being stuck. You know, what I've learned from being in a place of feeling stuck myself and from helping my clients kind of work through their own feelings of being stuck is that it's this feeling of being out of alignment with the you that you desire to be. You know, maybe you're not living in alignment with your values and something kind of just feels off. It's this feeling of unrest, and usually it's something that happens slowly over time. You know, it's not, I don't find that people, I don't know, I think that you can have feelings of feeling stuck, but like the deeper stuff, it's been the habits and the patterns that you've picked up and committed to either consciously or subconsciously, and that you continue to play out over and over again in your life. And often we keep doing the same things over and over again, and we expect to get different results. But you get to that point and you kind of feel like you're in a swamp, maybe like you're just slogging your way through life. And what I find is that once someone gets to that point, they often find themselves at like this crossroads of, okay, well, once they get the awareness, it's like, will I continue on this path, or will I make a choice to commit to something different? So what I found is that this comes in the form of some type of breakdown or like a hitting rock bottom, because we usually stay the same until that pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of changing, right? Because nobody really likes change, right? Everybody's like, it's like I'm comfortable where I'm at, you know? But then you get to that point where you're like, I just can't stay in the same place anymore. So the second thing that I want to highlight is how story kind of plays into this whole feeling of being stuck, because I talked about the habits and the patterns. And so, like you mentioned, Kylie, at the beginning of this, I'm the founder of, it's called YourStoryMatters.love. And so when I say your story matters, it takes on a double meaning for me. Really, it means that the story that the story of your life, how you grew up, what you were told about who you are and how the world works, that all matters, because then it shapes the story that you tell yourself on a daily basis as an adult about who you are and how you should or could live your life. So our stories are either keeping us stuck or propelling us forward, and it's our job to keep tabs on the stories we tell ourselves. So I do a lot of inner child work with my clients, and we look at how they got where they are now, what triggers them to go into what I call an adult temper tantrum, and how they can reparent the little person inside of them in a more loving, kind, and compassionate way to help them shift their stories so that they can move forward in creating better habits and patterns in their lives. So that's a little bit about what I do. Sorry, I feel like that was super long-winded, but it's a little bit about the work that I do with my clients.
Yeah, that's great. And I like how it was a little bit about your story, but it's also like, this is what I do with people and how that looks. So I'm kind of assuming that was a process that you went through as well, like personally, like you felt really stuck in a certain aspect of your life, or was it multiple aspects of your life? And then I really also liked when you said, that being stuck is just repeating the same things. Cause that's really helped me when I feel stuck, to remind myself that life you can't be stuck in life. Like you're always moving, you're always, moving forward in some way or another. It's like, are you just kind of moving forward and then doing the same thing and then doing the same thing? And every time it's a little bit different variation of that thing, but like we're dynamic, we're dynamic as people and humans. And so we're never truly just stuck in time. Like time's always kind of moving us forward as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that stuck is just a feeling, right? It's just something that you experience as you're on your way to feeling unstuck. It's, it's the lessons, it's the life lessons that you learn. And I feel like, yeah, we are growing. I have to laugh. Can you guys hear my dog?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Cute.
love it.
Yeah.
Okay.
My dog is normally the one barking, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm actually a little bit concerned that she might not stop. Can I let her in?
Oh yeah, totally.
Okay. All right.
I can pause. I'll pause the recording.
Should I just pick up? Oh, you're recording.
Yeah.
Go
Nope,
ahead.
you're good.
Yeah. So you asked, have I had my own moments like that? And the answer is yes, definitely. I feel like oftentimes we're able to teach from this place, or we're able to practice from this place of I've been through that before in my life. And so, what comes to mind is I've had two kind of big breakdown moments in my life that I would love to share with you. And it's funny I say that I would love to share with you because I feel like I'm far enough past them that I'm able to actually reflect and like look at the lessons and see them. Um, the first one was when I was in college, and I had just gotten myself into this space of kind of like numbing out with alcohol and being involved in not so healthy relationships. And essentially, there was stuff going on inside of me. I really feel like now that I look back, I can see that like my little girl was screaming that things weren't okay, but I was still trying to put on this front of everything's okay, I'm fine. The whole thing we do. We don't want to let anybody know that we're struggling, right? And so I needed an outlet and I needed to numb. And like I said, I did this through drinking and not making the best choices in my relationships. Um, and looking back now, I can really see that this was a buildup that happened like all throughout my childhood. Um, part of my story is that when I was 5, my parents got divorced and my mom moved us to this super small town in Western Pennsylvania. And when I say small town, I mean super small town. My graduating class was 99 people. And at the time that I was growing up, my brother and I were the only people of color in our school district and potentially in our entire town. So as a kid, dealing with my parents' divorce and entering into this space where I didn't look like anyone else, I think the story that I told myself was that in order to cope, I needed to just fit in as much as possible. So it was like, don't stand out, don't rock the boat, and you'll be okay. Because I believe that if I stood out and that, like, if everyone didn't like me and if I let people see the real me, then something bad would happen or that I would be rejected. So essentially, I believed that it was unsafe to be seen or to be heard. So in college, I continued to run that script of it's not safe to be seen, it's not safe to be heard. But because I wasn't allowing my true self to be seen, you know, my little girl who was trying for years to be seen and heard was like throwing, like I said, these adult temper tantrums, which are basically acting out from a place of your core wounding and not as like the healthy adult that you're supposed to be. So this happens, like you'll have a really big emotion to something, and it's kind of out of proportion with the situation or whatever triggers you. So another piece of my story is that my dad passed away when I was 10 years old, and I don't know that I ever appropriately grieved his death until this year. And so that had a big effect on the romantic relationships that I have had in my life, as you can imagine. And so it makes sense that, like, as I look back, I was acting out in those two ways. I was like, it's not safe to be seen or heard. So like I'm using alcohol to like kind of like feel a little bit more free, feel a little bit more loose. And then with my dad passing, that having the effect on the relationships that I was choosing to get into. So eventually got to this place. Go ahead, Kylie. Were you gonna? I got to this place where I was like, this is not the life that I want to be living. And I will never forget, I can still picture it in my mind. I was coming home one night after being out with friends, and I had been drinking and I'd been feeling super lonely, even though I was, surrounded by all these people. And I broke up my journal because writing has always been my way of communicating with God. And although at the time I doubted that he cared much for me because I was like, I'm a mess. And I just fell to my knees in my bedroom and I wrote, God, I can't do this anymore. Please take my life or make me new. You know, I don't know. I feel like a lot of people, we get to those places in our life where we're just like, I just can't do this way anymore. And that's kind of where I was at that time.
Yeah, I just want to like say there, like, to our listeners, like, I just know this is such a common story. I resonate with so much of it, and I know that, you know, our listeners are, you know, we're all kind of in the same age range, like where that was kind of that's the pattern, you know, and we may not have all ended up being coaches after it, but like this is such an important and true, you know, story that I think so many of us have experienced on some level, and just like the bravery, you know, those pivot points, that's what I call them. They're like the points in our lives when everything has kind of been building up to it. It's like when you look back on it, it's not like, oh, that was the moment that I decided to change. There was like a lot of little tiny decisions to kind of change and be like, this isn't right, I don't think this is working. But then there's that one moment that we always come back to that was like, I think that was the moment, you know, that like I decided something's got to give, kind of a thing. So thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. So Kylie, did you want to say something?
Can we just have you mute when somebody else is talking, Allie? I think we're getting a lot of back feed. So there's like a button in the left corner. So like if one of us is talking, there's a button in the left corner to have you mute yourself.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. No, you can go ahead and I'll just chime in after you're rolling.
Okay. Yeah, so at that point, like I woke up the next day and obviously I'm still alive. I'm still here with you guys today. And yet something was different. Like the world looked different. And I know it sounds really kind of silly to say that I was seeing with new eyes, but that's how I felt. And I just knew that something had shifted. And I really think that was less about, I really think that my heart changed in that moment, but I think it was about me making a decision, right? That like, I just couldn't do this anymore. And kind of in that desperation, you know, I connected back to my spiritual source, which at its core is love. And listen, I know that some people don't like to use the word God. I call it God. But I know that some people don't love that word because they've been hurt by the church. So maybe you call it source or universe or higher power or divine love. You know, at its core, it's love. And I feel like even though I didn't fully understand like what happened at the time, what I do know now about God and the universe is that they want to fully support us and they want to love us when we're good and when we're a mess and when we feel like we're not worth it. And that they're like, I feel like it's just like waiting for us to call out, right? Waiting for us to be like, okay, like, I don't think we're supposed to do this life on our own, right? And in a sense, in a way, what I mean when I say call out, I think it means make that decision that something needs to change. And then when we make that decision, it's like, all right, I'm ready. I'm here to like fully support you in making this decision. So.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you are talking about this decision. And I think when we make a decision, that's almost like our gateway into self-love. And kind of just like stating that you have a preference, you have the decision, now is the time. And it's almost like that surrendering. And I'm glad you talked about the lesson, because we do all have our story. As you said, we all have these things we've went through, and nothing is too big and nothing is too small. If it's our story, it matters. And I think that the hardest part for people, and women especially, is to be vulnerable and to be honest about things aren't perfect. My life, I feel a little bit like a mess right now. And I think one thing that we also have to realize is that looking back on ourselves without judgment, and those lessons that, you know, you had mentioned and that you talked about, we have to look back at them without judgment. But I think that's really hard. So I guess I would love for you to chat a little bit about how can we look back without judgment? How can we look back at something we've gone through or decisions we've made that maybe didn't serve us in that moment, but let the judgment fall away, that so we can stop repeating those processes as we move forward?
Yeah, so I think I agree with you 100%. I think that is definitely the hardest part of this whole process of self-love. You know, I've worked with people for years even, And it takes them a really long time. I actually just had a client say to me, okay, like I finally get it. This is the theme that you've been talking about since I started seeing you. It really comes back to me loving myself. And it's not about me trying to plug up all of the holes in, the ship that's sinking, which is my life right now. And it's not about me doing all of the things to try to make myself better. It's about me learning how to love myself. And it's funny because it's this kind of intangible thing, because it's hard. Like people, it's like, oh, love yourself. That should be, like easy or something. But it's like one of the hardest things that I think people can go through. And I think when you can see yourself as a child in some ways, or when you can think to yourself, like, what would I say to my best friend if someone else was coming to me and they were telling me this story? And if I were seeing myself through someone else's eyes, you can have more of a gentleness and more of a compassion with yourself, which really allows the blaming, the shaming, that judgment to kind of fall away.
Yeah,
when you can look at yourself in that way.
Yeah, I always say that I think it's layered, right? Like there's so many layers of this, like of self-love, because you can feel like, oh, I get it, I'm on it. And then, a day later, there's something that you're totally like it's almost like the subconscious self-judgment that comes in certain situations. And so there's like this definitely like this peeling back of the layers of these self-judgments and self-berating and like trying to control yourself. And I always say, like, to my clients that, if you can't do self-love, do self-compassion, which I think is kind of what you're saying. Like self-love sometimes is just it's like a huge ask, especially if our patterns have been to, do the opposite for so long, to speak to ourselves not very nicely, to, judge ourselves constantly. And it's just almost like this constant voice in the back of our mind. Then like compassion is something that can be a little bit easier. And then there's this quote that I always use as well. It's called, whatever arises, love that. So it's like, even the judgment sometimes, even the self-beratement, it's like, if you're compassionate towards it, you kind of understand where it's coming from. It's like, this is why I'm speaking to myself like this. I can kind of understand why I created that pattern in the first place. Doesn't mean I have to keep doing it, but it does mean that if we're choosing self-love instead of, is my audio bad? Sorry. Oh, okay. Sorry guys.
Sorry. It's just like kind of every time you like move your hands, it's like, I'm being picky today.
No, actually, someone was telling me that my mic sounded really weird yesterday when I was wearing these headphones. I thought these were the better headphones.
It's like, it sounds like you're going like this.
Right now? Right now even?
No.
Okay. I'll just have to
hold
it for now. It's doing it?
Not now.
Okay. I'll just freeze. Okay, so let's see. Pause. So sometimes self-compassion can be an easier thing to do for ourselves than self-love.
Okay. Yes, totally. I completely agree. I love that you brought that up, Clara, because I do think that when we start with self-compassion, we can really grow into self-love. And so I'm glad that you brought that up. Allie, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, but one thing I would love for us to dive into, because I think that maybe for us, like the whole inner child analogy is just like, oh yeah, we talk about that. That's nothing new. But maybe you could go into explaining that a little bit more for our listeners. Maybe, if it's new to somebody, you can help them to better understand what that means, the inner child, and kind of like looking at ourselves in that way?
Sure, I would love to. It's one of the things that I love most that I get to do with my clients is um, because it really is the gateway, like you were saying, to self-compassion and self-love, is recognizing that we've had these things, all of us, right? Like we have, there are people who have wonderful childhoods, right? But none of us really go throughout our childhood unscathed, right? So some people have really deep emotional traumas or other types of traumas. But we all kind of have what I call, in some senses, core wounding. And this can just be something that someone said in the lunch line, as you're waiting in the lunch line and like a bully says something to you, right? It doesn't have to be something really intense like a trauma. And so whenever there's this core wounding, then that sticks with us. If it doesn't appropriately get healed, then that sticks with us. And as we go throughout our life, then we can get triggered by things that are similar. And it's kind of like picking a scab on a wound, right? It opens it back up again. And instead of responding like the healthy adult that you are, you tend to respond like that. If something happened to you when you were 7 years old or whenever you were 3 years old, you maybe respond like a 3-year-old or like a 7-year-old instead. And it's really just your inner child trying to say to you as the adult, I need you to heal this part of what happened to me. Like, I need you to see me. I need you to hear me. There needs to be some healing around this space. And so when we have these temper tantrums, I feel like it's really a way of our inner child saying, give me attention, love me in this space. And so part of that process is really looking at what are the things that trigger you, right? And then kind of looking back, I work with my clients to look back and say like, okay, when did that first happen? And now that you know that, and how can you hold space for that little person? And what I do actually is, if people want to get in touch with their inner child, is one, you can notice your triggers where they are, but two, just get a picture of yourself as a little girl or a little boy, right? And carry that picture with you. And often what I have people do, and I actually want to give credit where credit is due. John Bradshaw has a book called Homecoming, where he talks all about inner child work. And I have people write letters to and from their inner child. And this process is really beautiful. And the reason why I don't have them just speak it out to me, and I don't have them type it. I have them actually write it out, because the process of actually writing it down, there's something that happens in our brains whenever we write it out. And he recommends in the book, and I have my clients do this as well, that when you are writing the letter from your inner child to your adult self, that you write with your non-dominant hand, because it bypasses kind of that the practical in your brain, and it helps you get more in touch with that more playful kind of like young part of yourself. And so I have them write a letter from their little girl to their adult self, and then from their adult self to their little person. And the little person is just expressing what they need, and the adult is saying like what they promise to do, or making commitments and saying like, I'll be there for you, like I want to hear you, I want to see you. So that's really how I help people around that, and that's kind of the beginning of the process of doing that. Did that make sense?
Yes, totally. I love that. And I'm so glad. Thank you for giving us a little bit of maybe something that somebody can take and do to play around with that. And then also a book. I've actually been playing around with so I got this book that talks about, it's all about play. And it is so interesting because everything in it is really reverting back to and kind of cultivating like that inner child. Like when you were a child, what were the top 3 things that you loved to do when you didn't have anything else to do, or things like that. And I think that as this all kind of entangles it up together, as we cultivate that inner child, we're going to find that self-love is going to become so much easier. And I feel like we begin to take life less seriously. And that's when, kind of going back to looking at those lessons, we can be a little bit less judgmental because we're looking at ourselves as just a child going through those things and learning those lessons along the way. And it's, you've heard it before, but would you scold a child if they made a decision that you made as a 25-year-old or a 30 or a 50-year-old? Would you scold that child, or would you be more compassionate and more loving and guide them in a way that's a little bit more gentle?
Yeah, so one of the other things that comes up whenever I'm doing this work is that people will say, well, I don't know how to like self-soothe. Like even if I recognize, right, that I'm acting out, or if I recognize that I'm kind of like throwing a temper tantrum or being triggered by something, I don't know how to self-soothe. So then I go to alcohol, or I go to some other thing to soothe me, right? And I always say, okay, do you have a little person in your life? Because sometimes it's really hard for people to get in touch with their own inner child. And so I say, okay, do you have, either your children or a niece or nephew, or just like a little person that you really love? And I said, can you imagine if they were going through what you're going through, or that they went through what you went through? I ask people, and I ask them to speak it out loud. I say, what would you say to them? And people are able to do it so easy whenever they're doing it for someone else. And I'm like, then you know how to do it for yourself as well. So it's a really beautiful process, because I think that we do really know how to do it. It's just learning how to do it for ourselves.
Yes. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I think that, it's definitely something that everyone can do when they think about a child in their lives. And why do you think and this might be like a huge question, but why do you think it is that people, do have this tendency to not speak to themselves so nicely? Like, why are we all doing that?
That is a really big question, and it's something that we all do, so there's something there. But I feel like part of it is around the way, in some senses, that we're parented. And this isn't necessarily to blame our parents, but I think that we need to be like these harsh, almost like we need to be these harsh parents in our lives, that if we were to allow ourselves to just freely move in a space of love, that maybe we would just go out of control and be off the rails. And so we kind of, I think it speaks really to a feeling of like, oh my gosh, if I love myself too much, then does that mean that I'm going to be selfish? Does that mean that I'm going to go off the rails, be out of control? And so I think a lot of it relates back to us feeling like we really need to like rein ourselves in. Or even I think about growing up in sports, you think about the idea of the typical coach who's pushing the athlete to be better. And I think that those are kind of things that everyone can resonate with. And so then we kind of model that in the way that we treat ourselves.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's so good, because I remember the first time I kind of had the realization that I could be trusted, like around food specifically was kind of my story, was, kind of binge restrict cycles. And the first time I even contemplated the idea that maybe I could trust myself with around food was like a mind explosion, because for my entire, life, I had thought, I need to control this. I need to. And it was this really interesting, like, it was like the wild horses were going to get let loose if I just let myself do it. And I experimented, we've talked about this before, but with just, letting myself eat whatever I wanted to eat. And it turned out it was fine. It turned out that I wanted to eat what was good for me. And sometimes you might overeat, you might eat something that doesn't make you feel good, but it's okay, because you can like trust yourself. And if you have that trust of self, life is so much easier. if you can trust yourself around food, around all these other things as well.
Yeah, I definitely think that self-trust is a huge piece of the story. Um, we don't often maybe trust, even in some senses, the adults in our life who, when we were growing up, like, will they keep me safe? Will they that care for me in the way that I need? And so then I think that transfers over into the way that we are with ourselves in other areas of our life. And I think that, like you said, it's taking it one step at a time. And that's the way that you build trust. Is I often say that it's like making deposits into a bank account, right? You Some things that we do for ourselves, it's like depositing it into the bank, and you're like, oh, okay, like I can trust myself a little bit more. And then sometimes, you withdraw it, right? But it's learning how to make more deposits into that self-trust bank than you are making withdrawals. And when you do make withdrawals, in terms of like maybe not following through with something that you said that you were going to do, I think it's about being, again, kind and gentle with yourself and saying, okay, like, I overspent this month, but I'm just going to replenish it next month. And that's okay, right? I didn't drain it down to zero. So I think that that's a really important thing, is looking at it in terms of the deposits and the withdrawals, but also being gentle with yourself in the process.
Yeah, I love that. I love that analogy. And it's true. Like, we ebb and flow. Everything that, with self-love, self-care, compassion, it's going to ebb and flow. And so that's where it's important to approach it with curiosity as a childhood. One thing that I kind of want to shift back to this idea of being stuck, because, it's easy for us right now. Maybe we all feel really like we're not stuck right now. Maybe we're all, and maybe one of us is, I don't know, but it's easy for us to sit here and talk about moving past it. But when you're in that stuck feeling, your feet are dragging, you feel like there's no way out, you feel like you're going to give up, and maybe you should just stay stagnant forever because you just can't move past it. How do you find the motivation? How do you dig deep, and how do you move past that? Because it's tough. When you feel stuck, it's not like you're like super motivated to move forward, to make the changes. So how do you kind of cultivate that self-love, or what steps or actions can you take to really find your way, baby steps, out of that feeling?
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said baby steps, because it can be really difficult in the beginning to feel motivated toward making any type of change. So, what I did myself whenever I found myself in those places, what I tell my clients to do is I call them experiments. And I just commit to doing one self-loving thing each day for 2 to 3 weeks and just see how it feels, right? For example, at the beginning of this year, I committed to a daily affirmation practice. Um, I had lots of other things on my morning routine to-do list, but I said, listen, if I don't do anything else, I'm going to do my affirmation, and that's okay. Like I'm just going to do that one thing. And then once that became a habit, I was able to add something else in. And then when that became a habit, I was able to add something else in. And so it's not, and I don't want to paint the wrong picture, because it's not always about adding things in. It's more about checking in with what's working and what's not, and giving yourself permission to change things up when something's not working. That's one thing that used to happen to me all the time. I'd be so rigid about, I have to do this, and this in the morning in order to feel good about myself. And then when I didn't do the fifth thing for like 5 days in a row, I'd end up beating myself up about it. And so like now I have a solid morning routine that I love, but how I got there was, instead of beating myself, I was like, I'm just going to take the fact that I haven't done this thing for 5 days in a row as a sign that something is not working for me. And I'm going to just change something up and see how it works. So I think that when you look at it as an experiment, it makes it easier. It's not something that you feel like you're committing to for the rest of your life and it's set in stone. It's more of like this, oh, I'm going to like you said, I'm going to be like a child. I'm going to be curious about the way that this works in my life, right? And something that might work for months could suddenly not feel good. And I'm not going to continue to hold myself to it just because it's something that I've always done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's such a good point, and it resonates so much because I think even people who, read the self-development books, they are doing the practices, like you're saying, like they're meditating, they're journaling. I see this all the time. It's like they are still holding themselves to this idea that they have to do those things or else something's wrong with them. And Madeline Moon is another person that talks about this really well, but about like sometimes your life just is messy, sometimes and self-love doesn't come from doing things. It comes from like an internal source. It's not from like, I journal because I love myself, I meditate because I love myself. That could be, but it's more about the energy with which you're doing those things, not about the things you're doing. And so I think that's like one of those layers, that a deeper layer, maybe like at the very beginning, you can start kind of having the discipline practices just to kind of tap into who am I, like where, the core of who I am, and like tap into that space and be a little bit disciplined about it at first when you've never had any experience with, any sort of self-awareness practices. But then as you get more experience with them and those become the judgmental kind of line in the sand, like if I don't do this, then I don't deserve love. If I do this, I do, so it's a really good kind of subtle point to make, that it's more about allowing yourself to kind of like do what you, and the experiment. Yeah, I just love that. The experiment and the curiosity. Something that I would love to ask you is, how to put this exactly. I find sometimes that when someone's in a really stuck place, so they're in that place where it feels like everything's kind of hopeless, they just keep repeating the same patterns. Like sometimes for me, it's almost better to have them stop everything. Like just stop trying to do all the, like stop trying so hard almost. And I would love to hear, your take on that. Like sometimes I'm just like, just go take a nap. Like if you're in a space where you're like banging your head against a wall, like trying to do things to make you feel unstuck, sometimes the thing to do is like not do anything. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And I experienced that. I was like, I think I mentioned I had two breakdowns. The second one was when we got back from Nicaragua. I was trying to come back and fit into this life. It's really hard to be overseas for a couple of years and then to come back and try to fit back into kind of the role or the boxes that you kind of like had lived in. And so I was just doing all the things to try to make it better. And I got to the point again where I was like, I can't do this. Like this just, I don't feel like I fit. And the harder and harder that I try to like discipline myself into being more or doing more, or just like really it was like a chasing after something that I thought was going to fulfill me, the worse it got. And so luckily at the time I was working with a coach, and I sent her this video message and I was like, I just can't do it anymore. I'm thinking of just stopping everything in life. And she was like, okay, how about instead of like quitting life, you just take a break. You just stop doing all the things that you feel like you're supposed to do or that other people are telling you that you're supposed to be doing. And she's like, and just like take a break. And she actually recommended that I get away from kind of like my normal environment where I was. And I was able to take some time and go away to the mountains for a weekend. And I was able to reconnect with my why. And I was able to reconnect with like, okay, who was I before all of this craziness, before I started like juggling like, 50 different things in the air? Who was I before this? And what did that look like? And so that was really helpful to just stop with all of the things. And again, it's that process of kind of just taking baby steps and choosing like one thing. And I think I allowed myself to just stop for like 3 months. And then I was like, okay, what do I actually really want to do? You know, what feels really good? But yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that sometimes you can get caught up in that place of just like more is better when that's not actually the case.
Totally. Yeah. And I always remind myself, like, I can't get there from here. Like from here where I feel stuck and frustrated and angry and sad, or just like I want to quit everything, life. Like I can't get to that place of feeling great, of feeling that momentum, of feeling like, almost that like euphoric, like when you really get in the groove, that almost like euphoric feeling of being like, I know where I'm going, I know what I'm doing, that unstuck feeling. You can't get, there from here. And so it's like I have to like change my state, have to shift how I'm thinking, because more thinking, I'll just keep thinking what I'm thinking, I can't get to that next level.
Yeah, and I think a big thing of that is to not learn how to tune out the noise, right? Because we live in such a noisy world right now, and people are just vying for your attention, and people are ready to give you their opinion about what is right for you. And so you get trapped in your head. And so not only are the voices in your head your own, they're the voices of your best friend and your mom and people on social media who you have no idea who they are, but they're commenting on your posts. And so suddenly you have all of these voices in your head, and you can't see or think clearly to kind of make a path forward. And so if people can get really quiet, and if they can get still, and this requires, dedication of setting up a time and a space to do these things, because it's not just going to happen where you have like quiet time and stillness. But if people can get in that place of being quiet and still and kind of reconnect back into, I think two things. One is, like I was talking about before, kind of this divine love, their source, like who was I actually created to be? And then also themselves of like, okay, well, who do I really want to be? So I think those are the two things. When you can drown the rest of it out and you can connect back to those things, then you can start to see like, oh, there is a path forward. And this is kind of what I want the path forward to look like.
That's so good. Yeah, I love all that, Allie. And I feel like you've given our listeners so many good things that they can actually take and begin using today. So I just want to encourage all of our listeners to really listen deeply and intently to this, and go back and maybe think about the inner child and writing the letters, or think about kind of these other steps that we've talked about. And I want you guys to pick which one resonates most with you and start there. If it is an affirmation every morning and building upon that, kind of deciding for yourself. So I'm just so thankful that you kind of gave practical tips as well for our listeners, Allie. And so I wanted to kind of invite you to share where people can find you. And then I know you have a little gift for our listeners. So maybe if you want to touch and share on that as well.
Sure. Yeah. I actually do a daily affirmation on my personal Facebook page. It's become one of my favorite things to do. So people can find me there. I think it's facebook.com, yourstorymatters.allyrose. And I respond to all of my comments, and I love interacting and connecting with people there. And I'm on Instagram at the Alley Rose, and on my website, yourstorymatters.love. Um, um, kind of just start. I find that it's an easy practice because it is something that's small that you can do.
Yeah, you guys, I follow Allie Rose on Facebook, and I use your affirmations all the time, Allie, and I share them with my clients all the time. So I know affirmations can be, for some people, it's difficult to come up with them. So I really want to encourage everybody to go and check that out, because you're getting almost a year's worth. You could have a different affirmation every single day. That's amazing. Okay, guys. Well, Allie, we just want to thank you so much for coming on. I'm really excited to, this just kind of sparked a little bit in me to retake some of these steps that you've mentioned and just, keep them. And sometimes I want to say to people as well, maybe Allie, you have something to add on this, but be very aware and intentional when you feel really good in your life, when it doesn't feel as messy, when things feel in order, when you feel balanced. Take note of where you are and don't give up on the things that are making you feel that way. Because I think sometimes we get into like, oh, I feel really good, like I don't need to be investing these little steps into self-love. I've been doing some affirmations in the morning. They make me feel really good, but then you kind of like push it to the side because does anyone else experience that?
Yeah, totally.
Right.
Yeah,
It's easy to kind of like throw it out the window because you're like, oh, I'm in a really good spot. So just, kind of flow with the things that feel good and like follow one good feeling after another.
Yeah, I would say this goes back to kind of just building it like a muscle. Like I always say to people, it's like, if you want to get fit, you can't just go to the gym like once a week or once a month and expect to get fit. So it's like, building that muscle of self-love. But the other thing is too, that then when you kind of fall off, because you've already built the muscle of it and it becomes the second nature part of who you are, and you recognize like, oh, I've kind of like fallen off a little bit from this, it makes it that much easier to hop back on to the practices that you were doing that made you feel really good, if it becomes like habit, if it becomes second nature. And those days, because honestly, like, I say stuck to unstoppable, and there are definitely days that you feel unstoppable, but I don't care who you are in life. You can be Gabby Bernstein, you can be Oprah. There are going to be days when you do not feel on top of the world. And so if you've made something a habit in the past and it's like second nature, you can kind of like draw on, okay, like I don't feel like doing this right now, but I know that it's going to be good for me to do this. So, and it's less of a struggle. There's less resistance whenever something has been a habit that you committed to in the past. You can pick it up a lot easier in the future.
Yeah, that's so true. That's something that that I've just noticed recently. Like there's been so many times I've got out my journal in the morning and kind of been like, I don't even know why I do this. Like I'm always journaling. I don't even know why I'm doing this. And then it's like you realize all those mornings of journaling have shifted something. It's like all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I feel totally different than I used to. And so even though like in the moment, I feel like sometimes I'm like, I don't even really know what I'm doing. It's like, it's the consistency, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely the consistency.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Allie, so much. This was lovely.
Yeah. Thank you, Allie.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
Mm-hmm.